The moment the lawyer slid the envelope across the polished mahogany table and into my hands, I could feel every eye in the room burning into me. The air was thick, heavy with greed, envy, and suspicion. I unfolded the crisp check slowly, almost cautiously, as if I already knew what chaos it would unleash. $30 million. That number stared back at me in ink so sharp it might as well have been carved into stone. Gasps erupted. Aunts clutched pearls. Cousins leaned forward, whispering. My parents sat perfectly still, too still. My father's jaw clenched like steel, his knuckles widening as his fingers drummed against the arm of his chair. My mother's lips curled into something between a smile and a snarl. And then, in an instant, everything exploded. My father lunged across the table, ripping the check from my grasp with the desperation of a starving man. My mother joined him, her diamond bracelet flashing in the chandelier light as she clutched the other end. You don't deserve this, my father barked. This is what you get for cutting us off, my mother hissed. Together, they stormed to the fireplace, their movements frantic, almost theatrical. They ripped the check to shreds and threw the pieces into the flames. The fire devoured the paper greedily, curling it into ash. The room went silent except for the crackle of burning ink. Everyone turned to me. Waiting. Expecting me to scream, to fight, to collapse. But I didn't move. I didn't protest. I didn't shed a tear. Instead, I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands neatly in my lap, and smiled. Because what they had destroyed wasn't the real inheritance. It was bait. A trap I had set years ago. And tonight, the fire they fed would come back to consume them. People always assume wealth makes life easier. They see marble floors, expensive cars, glittering jewelry, and think it must feel like heaven. But I was born into a hell gilded in gold. My father, Richard Lawson, was a man who built his empire on ruthless deals and broken promises. He was respected in public, feared in private. My mother, Claire, was his perfect mirror, elegant, sharp, cruel. Together they were a storm, and I was caught in the eye of it. As their only child, I should have been cherished. Instead, I was trained like a soldier. Every ballet recital wasn't about joy, it was about perfection. Every test wasn't about learning, it was about being the best. When I fell short, I was punished with silence, shame, or scathing words. Don't embarrass us. You're supposed to be better. You're ours. Remember that. I learned early that love in my household wasn't free. It was currency. And I could never afford it. The only person who ever broke through that darkness was my grandfather, Edward Lawson. Unlike my parents, he didn't care about appearances. He cared about me. I still remember the day I failed a math test in middle school. I was terrified to go home, knowing my parents would unleash their fury. I ran to my grandfather instead. He didn't scold me. He didn't call me stupid. He asked me what I loved. When I said writing, he smiled and handed me a leather-bound journal. Write everything, he told me. Your pain, your joy, your anger. Someday, words will be your weapon. He was right. That journal became my sanctuary. Every cutting remark from my parents, every humiliation, every dream I wasn't allowed to chase, I bled them onto the pages. And slowly, I began to understand myself. By the time I turned 21, my parents had already planned my future. They wanted me to marry the son of one of my father's partners, a smug, arrogant man I couldn't stand. To them, it was strategic. To me, it was a prison sentence. I refused. That single act of defiance severed whatever thin thread of connection we had left. My parents cut me off. No money, no support, no protection. At first, I thought I would crumble. I had never lived without wealth. Suddenly, I was in a one-bedroom apartment with peeling wallpaper and a leaky faucet. I worked 2 jobs, barista in the morning, bookstore clerk at night. I lived off instant noodles and hand-me-down clothes. It was humiliating. It was exhausting. But it was mine. For the first time, my life belonged to me. And in those dark, lonely years, my grandfather was my silent guardian. He didn't swoop in with cash to save me. Instead, he gave me something more powerful, knowledge. He told me things about the family, about hidden bank accounts, about my father's enemies, about the empire my parents thought they controlled. He taught me patience, strategy, and foresight. Never fight them head-on, he said. They'll always have more weapons. Instead, let them fight themselves. And when the time comes, strike where it hurts most, their pride. I didn't understand fully then. But I would. The day my grandfather died, I felt the earth shift beneath me. He was the only person who had ever loved me unconditionally, and suddenly, he was gone. The family gathered like vultures for the will reading. The room was filled with tension, perfume, and greed. My uncles whispered about yachts. My aunts speculated about estates. My cousins smirked, already spending fortunes they didn't yet have. And then came the moment. Mr. Harris, my grandfather's long-trusted lawyer, announced the assets one by one. Houses, cars, shares, all distributed neatly. Smiles bloomed around the room. Then he turned to me. To my granddaughter, he said, pausing as though savoring the words, I leave this. He handed me the envelope. Inside, the $30 million check gleamed. The room gasped. Murmurs erupted. My parents stiffened. And then, like predators pouncing, they attacked. My father snatched it from me. My mother joined him. They screamed, they ripped, they burned. And I smiled. Because my grandfather had told me about this moment. The check was a decoy. A symbol, not the real inheritance. The real prize was something far bigger, something only I knew about. A month before he died, my grandfather took me to his study. He opened a hidden drawer in his desk and pulled out files, ledgers, maps. This, he said, tapping the papers, is the empire no one knows about. He explained that while the family obsessed over the visible fortune, the companies, the estates, he had built another network beneath it. Silent partnerships, hidden accounts, offshore holdings. Entire businesses disguised under other names. And every bit of it was in my name. He smiled. They'll fight over scraps, thinking they've won. But you, child, you'll have everything. That's why I didn't flinch when the check burned. Because it was worthless compared to what I already had. But my inheritance wasn't just wealth. It was knowledge. Information. Secrets powerful enough to destroy everything my parents stood on. And I intended to use it. At first, I moved quietly. Subtle. Invisible. I began by pulling strings in my father's company. Through shell accounts my grandfather left me, I redirected investments. Anonymous partners withdrew. Projects collapsed. Deals failed. My father stormed through boardrooms, veins bulging in his forehead, furious at betrayals he couldn't trace. Meanwhile, my mother's charities began to unravel. Scandals leaked to the press, lavish parties funded by donations, personal expenses hidden in budgets. Sponsors pulled out. Her reputation as the darling of society shattered. They thought it was coincidence. Then they thought it was sabotage from rivals. They never suspected me. And as their empire crumbled, I lived quietly, modestly, unbothered. Watching. Waiting. Smiling. But revenge isn't clean. One night, I sat in my tiny apartment, the news flashing across the screen: Richard Lawson files for bankruptcy. I should have felt triumphant. Victorious. But instead, I felt hollow. I remembered being a little girl begging for their love. I remembered crying into pillows, wondering what I had done wrong. Destroying them didn't erase that pain. It didn't heal me. But it did something else: it freed me. I realized revenge wasn't about money. It wasn't even about them. It was about reclaiming the power they stole from me. And I wasn't finished. At a family gathering, when my parents were desperate, humiliated, begging distant relatives for loans, I walked in. Calm. Poised. I handed them an envelope. They tore it open, hope flickering in their eyes. Inside was the deed to the mansion, the last asset they clung to. But it wasn't theirs anymore. It was mine. Their faces crumpled. Horror. Rage. Desperation. "This is what you get," I whispered, echoing their words from the will reading. "Not for cutting me off, but for teaching me what love should never be." I turned and left, their cries echoing behind me. I walked away with everything they once had, but more importantly, I walked away with myself. They had burned a check, but I had burned their legacy. And in the ashes, I found freedom. For the first time in my life, I wasn't defined by their control. I wasn't their pawn, their tool, their possession. I was me. And that was worth more than $30 million.